Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
That there's been a lot of attention on athlete maltreatment, but we mustn't forget about the benefits of this safe sport movement for coaches as well. And we're going to take two examples of making a cultural shift. One is from punishment to discipline, and the other is shifting from hard training to smart training. And the way this will work is I will review some of the theory and what the research tells us on these topics. And then Dave will bring that research to life by talking about his personal and applied experiences. So next slide, please. There we are. Okay. So you'll see on the left-hand side, the prevention of harms. And really this is in reference to the Universal Code of Conduct to Prevent Athlete Maltreatment, which really focuses on prohibited conduct, the things that we want to avoid or prevent. But that's only a piece of the puzzle, because the prevention of harm does not necessarily mean that sport experiences are optimized. It only means that we've prevented harm. What we want to be focusing on is the right side of the column of the table here, where we have enjoyable sport experiences, where there's a sense of achievement, people feel included, and we do all the things that we claim sport does for people. Contributes to health and development and life skills and so on. So in some ways, the arrow should go the other way, because when a sport experience is optimized, when we achieve the things on the right-hand side, safe sport or the prevention of harm happens as a natural byproduct. So the benefits of positive, healthy sport for athletes are, of course, not having harmful sport experiences. Also, that there's increased enjoyment. And when people enjoy their sport experiences, they're more likely to stay involved. And not only stay involved as athletes, but stay involved post-retirement. And this is what we all want to see. People who love participating as athletes and stay in the sport in another role as a coach, as a volunteer, that they put their own kids in sport. This is the ideal picture. It also can lead to better performance, and this is an issue I'll come back to in a moment. And finally, that there are better relationships and the learning of important life skills. When you think about it, millions of parents around the country put their kids in sport for these very reasons, because it's a wonderful way to learn the important life lessons and life skills that are going to help them in school and in work and relationships outside of sport. This is why kids come into sport in the first place. I'll turn it to Dave for the coaches piece.
Yes. First of all, thank you everyone for having us back, and I appreciate the warm welcome that we had. I think that it's very important to remember that the benefits of what we're talking about here, and Gretchen has outlined so well, is very reflective of coaches being happier in their day-to-day work. And I think that that's really a message that I try to share with people when I consult or talk, is that it's not only about, obviously we want the athletes to have a better experience and we want them to be happier, but also we want coaches to be happier at work. And I think the list here, which I'll go through, is a lot of scientific data has been supported on high-performing teams and high-performing cultures and people's personal happiness with life. But also it reflects kind of how people just feel as though they are part of something that's meaningful, as the second slide. So Oh, sorry. What does the research kind of support that when we move in this matter of positive, healthy environments and supportive cultures? What do we get? Well, one is the coaches feel reduced stress and they feel reduced burnout rates, which I think unfortunately is something that a lot of people are dealing with right now. They also seem to enjoy their work better. They feel as though they have a purpose and a meaning behind going to work every day, working with the athletes, and they feel motivated and engaged to kind of be learning new things, trying new things, having healthy disagreement and healthy discussion. Not that it is always about money, but we have to be realistic that it is a financial endeavor to run a gym club. And so what we see is there's an increased financial health of the club. So there's more membership, there's more retention, there's more global income because kids are happier with their experiences. And so they stay in the program, whether that's the recreational level, they sign up for a continued semester, or the highest competitive team level. They stay involved as the difficulty goes up level to level. As Gretchen mentioned, we see an enhanced performance for the athletes, but also we see an enhanced performance for the coaches themselves. What we mean by that is that the coaches feel as though they are part of a professional partnership where there's success in terms of competitive performance, but also objective learning markers. And they also feel as though their own personal level of education is increasing to a sense of mastery, which is what the next point kind of alludes to, is they feel as though they are not just living to work. They feel as though they are really a part of something meaningful. They're making a big impact on the athletes' lives, and they themselves are increasing their personal skills, their personal education, and their ability to handle challenging problems. So a very important one towards the end here is that the coaches tend to have a better sense of self-esteem and self-worth. They feel as though they feel good about their self-worth in terms of feeling accomplished. They feel as though they're educated, and they feel as though when they solve problems, they feel good about that. And they also feel as though they have more self-efficacy, which goes along with that, which is the feeling that you have the resources to appropriately handle a challenge in front of you instead of getting frustrated. So very important list there, but I think it's important we kind of share the duality between athletes getting success, but also the coaches themselves being more successful with this model.
So one of the questions that often comes up when we talk about safe sport or positive, healthy sport is whether it's possible at all levels of sport. There's general agreement that it works at the recreational level or lower competitive levels, but there seems to be doubt or uncertainty about whether it's possible at the high performance level. And I think this is a valuable time to kind of question um, any assumptions that it's not relevant or possible at high performance levels. First of all, where is the evidence that suggests, if you focus on building people up, that they won't perform really well? We clearly have evidence that there are huge costs of not taking this approach. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about one study that was done where Olympic and world champions were selected, and they were selected on the basis of having what we call athlete-centered coaches. And what by that, we mean that power was shared, that there was a more democratic style of coaching where the coach absolutely has expertise and uses that expertise as a guide or facilitator of the athlete's development. But the athlete is a partner in this process. So the athlete is engaged in decision making and problem solving with the coach. It takes the tone of, okay, here are our goals. How are we going to get there? We have this issue to resolve. How are we going to, let's sit down and discuss it. How are we going to fix this problem? So it's very much a shared power or shared control model. And the athletes maintain self-responsibility and control of their own training and their own performance. So this is the method by which they not only learn the life skills we claim sport teaches, but also because these were Olympians and world championships, many of whom were Canadians. This study was one that demonstrates that it is possible to use this style of coaching and still put people on the podium. So let's now turn to two examples we've chosen for tonight's talk. One is around shifting from punishment to discipline. And I will say before we get into this content, that this is not just a shift that's occurring in sport, but it's occurring in other sectors in which young people are involved. So the strategies that parents used 20, 30 years ago leaned far more towards punishment. And for many of us, we're very familiar with corporal punishment, spanking, the wooden spoon, the strap, these kinds of things decades ago that parents just don't use anymore. Similarly, we've seen a change in the education system. It was not that long ago when teachers or principals could physically strike a child in the school. Now, of course, that would never happen. So we're not the only ones who are facing this kind of cultural shift. And very often the terms punishment and discipline are used interchangeably, but they actually mean two different things. So common examples that we see in gymnastics and other sports are wrestling with this shift as well. Exercise as punishment for poor performance, for not paying attention, kids fooling around or not putting in full energy, whether it's conditioning or sitting in splits, that's not for conditioning purposes, but for the purposes of punishment. Negative comments about the person, name calling, criticizing the person with the intent of publicly shaming them in front of others, berating or threatening comments, as well as body shaming, which in our sport we know is a problem. And all of these things in the Universal Code are called emotional abuse. So here's an example of where what used to be okay in terms of punishments is now deemed as a form of abuse. And the other one is removing athletes from practice. So essentially kicking them out of the gym for not paying attention, not devoting sufficient energy and effort. Okay, so here's what the research tells us about the use of punishment. Any correction in the behavior is very short-lived. The benefits don't last, and the benefits don't last because there's no learning involved. All that the kid has learned is that person has power over me, but there's no learning on the child's part. It actually encourages negative responses. All you need to do is think back to when you were an adolescent and you wanted to get out of the house to go to a friend's place or go to a party. And you come in past curfew, you get grounded. What do the next time? You lie about where you're going. You say you're staying over at a friend's house, or you sneak out of your bedroom window once your parents have gone to sleep. So this is a common phenomenon that kids find a way around punishments. It harms the self-esteem because basically what it says is, I have power over you and I don't trust your judgment, so I'm going to control your behavior. It's been linked in the research with children and adolescents that it's associated with mental health challenges like anxiety, depression. Body shaming is linked to body image disorders as well as eating disorders. And there have been studies done in our sport of gymnastics clearly showing the links between these. The responsibility lies with the coach. And going back to what Dave said earlier about the benefits of another approach to sport, having this responsibility is stressful. It's much better for the coach when the responsibility lies with the athlete themselves. And further, it damages the coach-athlete relationship. It's it adds this negative tone towards their interactions. So the thinking and the practice in other domains is to replace punishment with discipline. This is very different, and it's about teaching or guiding athletes, in this case, to the desired behavior. And the steps involved in discipline are to be very explicit about what's expected. So I need everyone to come to practice on time. Explain why the desired behavior is important. Getting to practice on time is important because warm-up is critical to getting prepared for physical training and injury prevention, and it's something that we do collectively, and those are some of the reasons why it's important to arrive to the gym on time. And then guide with strategies to achieve desired behavior. So how are you going to get to the gym on time? What time do you need to leave school in order to be there? How long before training do you need to eat in order to be ready on time? There's no doubt, though, that sometimes, even after doing all those steps, that the desired behavior doesn't occur. It's inevitable. This is when natural consequences, they're called natural or logical consequences, can be very, very helpful. Just as the name suggests, these are things that happen naturally in response to a behavior that are imposed by nature, society, or another person. So for example, getting cold hands in the winter when we don't wear mitts. You know, how many of us as parents have nagged our kids to put on their hat and mitts to go out in the winter, when as long as it's not dangerous, there's no harm in letting them experience the natural consequence of getting cold hands, at which point they say, oh, my hands are cold, maybe I better go back in and get my mitts. Okay, a child failing a test because they choose not to study. Any of us receiving a speeding ticket when we drive too fast, this is part of a social contract we have in society. When we drive too fast, we get a speeding ticket. So these are different from punishments because it's natural learning or it's part of a social contract. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about how this notion of natural consequences and positive discipline can be used in the sport environment.
Yes, thank you so much. And it was very great to overview some of those concepts. I unfortunately am going to share some negative examples of some situations that I've been a part of as a coach that were not examples of this in the positive light. And then in the next slide, I will hopefully share a better story of what happened recently. That is an example of how our gym has changed and how I have changed as a coach. So I put this picture here on purpose. It is from our gym because the story takes place not so on balance beam, but exactly where this picture is taken. And so this was 5 years ago during a very busy practice in season where a lot of us are tired from the middle of the season. We're worried about states coming up. It's already stressful with school in the winter and all of that kind of things. But I was standing right where that little balance beam is on the floor, coaching vault, which is directly off to the right. And the other athletes that I were working with were on the other side of the beams on the other vault runway. You can see the rainbow floor back there because there's a pit vault the other way. So just to frame the dynamic, because it's important, is I had set up a bunch of drills and we were in the middle of a rotation, and the athletes that I was trying to coach currently in front of me were doing one thing, but then I looked across the gym and I saw, a group of 5 athletes that I coach in the group talking, not doing side stations we had set up despite, lots of explanation and kind of explaining, we need to do these drills. It's important. But as, things went, it did not happen. And my immediate first reaction after I had noticed a couple times they were not working was I actually just shouted across the gym and across this rotation of where these athletes were working on beam that, hey, you guys need to get going. Let's stop talking, get to work. Like very sharp, very brash, and very kind of like, again, vocal yelling across the gym. And those gymnasts obviously heard me, and they instantly were upset, and they were a little bit like, whoa, like Dave's kind of in a bad mood. And so they started to gossip amongst their group. They kind of slowly dispersed to a drill or two, but somehow still talked, like they were like kind of would roll every once in a while. I looked, but they would still talk about me. And so I saw that. I turned to the coach who was standing next to me, and I started to gossip about these kids are lazy. They never want to work out. We put so much effort in as coaches, and all they want to do is talk. No wonder they're not getting great scores. And I really just completely ignored the situation and kind of talked under my breath to the athletes, to the coaches about the athletes. So obviously nothing got solved. And so the gymnast continued to not do the station. And I then kind of lost my cool and I screamed across the gym, something to the nature of, if you don't want to do it, get out and stop wasting our time, right? Like something along that nature that I don't yell often. And so it was very uncharacteristic. I probably was having a very short fuse already from a long day at work. I work another couple jobs. So it was obviously an emotional reaction. And I screamed across the gym, and every one of the athletes who were standing on these beams between us, like stopped in their like footsteps and were like, whoa. And like the whole gym went quiet. It was very awkward. Nobody wanted to do anything. No one knew what to say. And one of the athletes on the other side of the gym, who now I love to death, we have a great relationship, it's fantastic, she yelled back, "Fine, I will," and she grabbed her stuff and she walked out. While the other four gymnasts she was talking at just stared at each other with large eyeballs. So the end result of this interaction was all of the athletes, including the ones who I were not coaching, just completely disrupted their practice. I was upset, the athletes were upset, and there was the tension you could cut with a knife for the next hour at practice until everybody went home. And of course, me and the athlete who ended up leaving, we just kind of didn't really talk for a couple days. We just kind of passed each other by. I tried to talk to her a couple times and she gave me very short, snappy answers. It took about a week or two for us to really kind of get on our even keel. And then we had a discussion about it and things rolled over, but it never really, our relationship in that season never honestly got back to what I would consider healthy, because we always had these standoffs between each other. So as the years went on, she was 14 at that time, or 15. As the years went on, and I'll share in the next story some things that we changed, our relationship got much better, and kind of the things that she was a very big catalyst towards a lot of the things that I changed in my coaching career. I have never yelled in the gym outside of a safety issue or a cheering thing. Because of that incident, I felt so horrible about the way it all went down. And I actually, as a weird thing, I never cross my arms anymore when I coach, because it sends off a very defensive vibe. They told me that after the situation. I was like, are there things that I do that make you guys think that I'm in a bad mood or kind of give my tail? And they're like, well, you get really quiet and you don't tell us anything, and you stand there with your arms crossed and you ruminate and you brood. And you talk. We see you talking to the other coaches about us. It's not a question. So I was like, you're very right. And then I had the fluid discussion the other way about like, okay, here are some things that frustrate me. I spend 40 minutes on a drill plan. I set up all these drills, and then I look over and you guys aren't doing anything. And then you are upset when you can't flip vaults, or you're not having the performances that you want, or something's wrong. And so they were like, good point. And so we had a fluid communication, but I wish that had happened earlier. So that is the old example. And then we can pop to the next slide, and I can share with you a real life example of something that I think really represents well what happened 5 weeks ago, right? This first story was 5 years ago. So this was 5 weeks ago. I was thinking a lot about what example to use, and I realized how much of a parallel this situation was. And I want to give credit where it's due. A lot of this comes down to me learning from past experiences with other coaches, seeing how they operate, reading books, listening to podcasts, reading research like Gretchen's and other people, to try to understand how to better handle these things. And a lot of this comes down to my wonderful, amazing boss, Eva Shute, who has a degree in mental health and mental counseling, and kind of gave me, I told her, this is what frustrates me. I don't know how to handle this. And she gave me very concrete steps on things to do, which I'll share now, which were kind of our way to do it. So 5 weeks ago, we were on bars, not vault, but very similar situation. I set up all these drills, said, here's the assignment. And 4 of the athletes were just not really productive. There were like 3 that were trying to be productive, but 1 athlete was really the catalyst for a lot of distractions. She was very casually going through the motions. And immediately I kind of stopped and I realized what was happening. And I thought, okay, first of all, like, what did I do wrong to make this a problem? Why are we getting congested around the chalk bucket? And I looked around and I realized I had 2 stations next to 2 other reel bars, and really everyone was backing up on 1 station. So they would get their chalk, but they would stand in line because I did not set up a nice flow of traffic to go do a couple drills that you don't need chalk for before you go back to the reel bar. So I instantly realized, okay, number 1, I have not set up a great structure here. And number 2, what I'm asking them to do in a 45-minute time slot is wildly unrealistic, right? I think I said something along the lines of do 3 routines and then 2 of each half, and then do these drill circuits. And by the way, do the conditioning on the side, right? That's an impossible assignment. There's no way that that's going to be done. And I just kind of let it get away from me. But the first thing I did was think about, okay, what's my role here and what can I change? And so after that, I thought about that. I went up to that athlete group and I said, hey, I just want to let you guys know, like, I set up some drills. I made a mistake. We're going to add 2 more drills in before you get back in line. But we have a meet coming up. We need to be productive. And let's try to just kind of keep the motivation high. I know it's Wednesday. It's late on a Wednesday. You're tired, but do the best you can and we'll see what happens. So they were like, okay, we'll get to it. 3 of those athletes who I mentioned were kind of already on the way, kind of got what they were supposed to do. But one athlete really still was finding a way to just go through the motions. And so the second time, I pulled her aside from the group calmly, and I just said, hey, is everything okay? I noticed that like you're really unmotivated. Your energy's not really here. Is there something you need to talk about? Is the assignment too hard? Is there something going on? And she just said, I'm just tired. I had a long day at school and I'm really just not feeling it, right? Like I'm not feeling it is the most common response that I typically get from sometimes these groups. So I said, okay, I understand that. I can empathize with that. I was once an athlete, but we still have work to do and we have to somehow be productive, even if it's not going to be the most productive practice. We just can't be distracting, right? Because 1, it's unsafe for you and it's unsafe for the other athletes to not be focused before your turn. But 2 is that, we have things that you told me were important to you at this meet and you'd like to do well. So let's take 5 minutes, go for a walk, get a drink, splash some water on your face, and think about, what do we want to do here? Do we want to stay and keep on the event and keep working? Or would you like to maybe just sit this event out or take it on just drills? You tell me what you want to do and then come back to me and we'll chat about it. So that goes through. She comes back and says, I'll jump back in line, going about it. 10 minutes go by, and yet again, we're really struggling. So I pull her aside and say, hey, this is not working. This is not safe. I think that this is just not going to go well. Let's take the event off, and let's just try to be collective on the next approach to come back. And so I just said, this is not safe right now. You're missing turns. You're slipping your hands off the bar, blah, blah, blah. So it ended there where she did take that event off and then she jumped back into beam, which was much less frustrating for her. And things did go well. Now, I do want to point out there's been times when that does not go well. And it's another layer it continues of distraction. What we do in that situation is simply say to them, okay, we're going to call it a night. We're going to give you another assignment. We're not going to do stuff for the rest of the practice. Here's some flexibility work. You can still be part of the team. We want you to be here, but we're not going to do routines. We're not going to do heavy stuff. It's just unsafe right now. And we need to figure out, maybe, are we too tired? Did we not sleep last night? What's going on? But let's just take tonight and then tomorrow we will come back. And oftentimes I tell the athletes, I can't make you do anything, but you do have to deal with the consequences of whatever choice you do make. So, and the way that typically comes out is 4 weeks down the line when the meet comes and they don't have a great practice before, they don't have a great meet and they're really upset. We get them through the meet, however we need to, safely and possibly. But on Monday, we say all right, well, let's analyze why you were unhappy at the meet. We're going to trace this back to, hey, remember 4 weeks ago on bars when you really weren't feeling it, and then the next day you didn't come, and then the next week you really weren't feeling it. These are the natural consequences of choices we make. And so if we want a better outcome, we need to make better choices. And here's a plan how we can make that. Here's how we can get more sleep. Here's how we can fuel ourselves well before practice. Here's how I'll change the assignment to make sure it's manageable. Let's change your routine a little bit so it's not so hard in this sequence. But we'll make that plan and then we're going to tackle it moving forward. And it was a very fluid, honest conversation between the two of us. No bad feelings besides the ones at the meet. But everybody felt much better with that outcome. And she has a great relationship with me still, and she actually had a wonderful meet last weekend. So hopefully 2 helpful examples there. Sorry, a little long-winded, but I wanted to paint my artistic picture for you. And as we can see here, just quickly summarizing the differences between the 2 approaches that I took and kind of what the literature I've read supports there is on the left, the then would be, it's an emotional reaction. I instantly jumped to blaming the gymnast. I was gossiping and I was critiquing the person. And in terms of what I was asking, it was all in what I wanted, what I demanded. Clearly, there was yelling and shouting. It was really about me being the one driving change. There was a huge lack of empathy. I didn't even ask the athletes what was wrong. And it was really on irrational or arbitrary logic versus the alternative, which I just described, was I had some reflection first, right, to think about what I did wrong or kind of what the big picture was. There was dual accountability between the two of us. There was a lot of communication as the first action. What Eva has taught me is always critique the behavior you see, not the actual athlete as a person. And the reference of change was our agreed upon cultural guidelines. This is not in line with how we agreed we want to operate our practice. And then the athlete was in control of change. I think there's a very important part in that story where I said, here are the two options. What would you like to do? And there's a lot of literature that says the perceived locus of control and the ability to make an autonomous decision is massively important for someone's behavioral change. It was led with empathy, and I tried my best to weave in some life or personal development logic, as Gretchen pointed to.
Thanks so much for those stories, Dave. They were so revealing and so informative. I love the way that you're really a reflective practitioner. You take a step back and really reflect on what worked, what didn't, and why. The other thing I really like about your stories is that it's so tempting when you're working with other people and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, to jump to the reaction of, what's wrong with them? Why are they not
Right.
doing what they're supposed to do or doing it the way they should? But in your reflection, you change that to say, what have I done to contribute to this? Or conversely, what could I do differently to help them behave in the ways that we're hoping them to behave? So really important insights. Just to summarize this section, the latter stories that Dave told about the now, was learning involved in that. The athletes are learning about the importance of taking responsibility. They're learning about the importance of having a voice and telling Dave what they found frustrating. And similarly, they learned about how to make relationships work by hearing what he found frustrating. So that's a life skill development. And that's where you see real change, is when there's learning involved. It keeps the decision making with the athlete. So this is about self-responsibility. And I love Dave's comment about, at the end of the day, you really can't make anybody else do something they don't want to do. It just won't stick. So it's got to be up to the athlete. And this is the self-control and self-responsibility. It takes the pressure and stress off the coaches. Coaches are actually not responsible for the athlete's performance at the end of the day. The athlete is. You of course take a very important role in guiding, teaching, facilitating, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's up to the athlete. And you could tell in his last story that it was a lovely relationship that was developing between the athletes and the coach. So now we'll turn to our second example, which is shifting from hard training to smart training. So I'll begin with what is often called old school teaching, old school parenting, or old school coaching. And that's a very controlling coaching style, command and control, that was very prevalent in working with young people decades ago, but isn't anymore. So with this style, power is used to affect change by promising rewards or threatening punishments. Do this or else, or do this and you'll get this reward. This takes away self-responsibility. This is all about external control of behavior. Being overly critical, using traditional kind of phrases that don't reflect contemporary ways of doing things, or the need for professional development, because what we learn about athlete development, what we learn about child and adolescent development changes over time. So, more is not always better. It's about quality, not quantity. Um, Coaching the way I was coached. Well, 20, 30 years ago, the methods were very, very different than what they are now. And even if they were accepted then, now they're not. So this is about keeping up to date and self-reflecting. Pushing or threatening athletes through difficult periods. Again, taking full responsibility as the coach and controlling someone's behavior. And this notion of mental toughness that we have in sport is very often used as a disguise for psychological abuse. I was, not letting the athlete off the beam, even though she was crying, until she did that skill she was afraid of, because she's got to be mentally tough. Well, we do that frequently enough, and that converts into psychological abuse. And then intentionally withholding attention if athletes don't perform. This also is a method of control, which basically says, I, as the coach in a position of authority and power, don't think you're worthy enough of my attention. And so that can be very damaging to an athlete's sense of self. So the current ways of looking at any leadership style, this is for teachers, coaches, etc., is called autonomy-supportive, or just supportive. This is about providing athletes with choices. And this doesn't mean they get to decide whether to do conditioning or not, but it may involve, what type of conditioning they're doing, what kind of upper body conditioning are they doing. And we do this in an age and developmentally appropriate way. Certainly older athletes, more mature athletes, those at the high performance level, can have a lot more input and decision making than younger kids. This speaks to Dave's example that when the athletes are showing indications of lack of attention or fear or distress, that should be the signal when the coach says, what do I need to do differently? And really coming from a place of empathy, of trying to understand before reacting. Even the use of words, all athletes, to develop their talent and their performance, need to move out of their comfort zone. But there's a real difference between coaches encouraging athletes out of their comfort zone and pushing athletes. Encouraging keeps the control of that decision and the control of the effort with the athlete. And if they don't enact that, then that's a natural consequence. Providing feedback that's solution focused rather than problem focused. So rather than providing feedback that identifies the problem technically or effort-wise, using feedback that gives guidance to the athlete as to how to fix the problem or the effort. And I'll turn it back to Dave.
Yes. Buckle up, because this is another one that's a little bit cringy for me to even talk about, the fact that I used to be this way. But here's another picture from 5 years ago. You can tell this is time-stamped because I had a clearly different, had a haircut that was a little bit different back then. But back in my 5 years ago, old school coaching mentality, which I thought was successful, I'll give you a couple concepts that were really common for me, and then I'll share an example specifically. Is I really didn't ever take concerns of soreness or fatigue seriously when people were lining up for the lining up for a practice, or I'd open up and tell them the conditioning for the night, and they would all be really upset, like, oh, but our legs are so sore and this and that. And I'd be like, well, common phrase I would always say is like, well, this is what it takes, like this is what it takes to be a gymnast. Or I would say, someone's on a skill and they're having a tough time, I would always say, well, we need to do it until we get it right. That's what it takes. Like that was very common out of my mouth all the time. And it makes my skin crawl, thinking about the fact that that was my answer for everything. But in terms of like how I approach practices, I used to fly by the whiteboard. If anyone's familiar with that term, I would have a whiteboard and I would be like, did we do pull-ups last week? We should probably do some pull-ups. How about Monday? Did we do leg stuff? We should do some leg stuff. How many plyos? Let's do 50 plyos. It was really grabbing stuff out of the air of what I saw on YouTube drills or social media forums or what I saw other coaches doing. And not that there isn't a benefit for that, but it's not really a great time to do it as you're actively trying to design a drill circuit in front of you. I would just make up drills as I was going on floor or bars or stuff like that. So the other piece of it is that it was pretty much a go hard all the time mentality. They were really like, if we practiced 5 days, there were 5 hard days, and maybe times there were 4 hard days and 1 light day out of reaction because everybody was really having a tough time or was almost like burnt out. But it was also very much that I thought I was hot stuff because I have a doctorate and I'm in physical therapy and I had been coaching and spotting, and I was new to this gym where they maybe didn't have the high level experience spotting that I did. So I rarely asked for other coaches' opinions to make drill circuits. I really asked the athletes what they thought was important to do. And it was really me just telling people what to do. And as I later learned, it really alienated my coaching staff from me along with the athletes. So a very heart-wrenching example of something that happened to me was I made a conditioning circuit that was astronomically too hard, right? It involved a lot of like lunge jumps and stuff beforehand. And then just kind of because I didn't feel as though the athletes were like working hard enough or sweating hard enough before practice was done, I said, all right, we're going to go down to the edge of the floor. We're going to do 4 laps of broad jumps back and forth. And then while you're waiting, do push-ups for your athletes to go. And I let time get away from me. And I think the athletes ended up doing somewhere between like 12 to 16 laps of broad jumps, which is about 100 squat jumps, right? And I wasn't maliciously trying to hurt someone's legs. I was just trying to really think about how can we best use our time. So in the moment, they're like, this is hard, no big deal. But when I tell you that our group chat, which is a WhatsApp kind of like parent mediated group, was full of, I can't walk down the stairs. My legs hurt so bad. I can't even touch my legs. This is terrible. I can't go to school. I felt really bad because in the moment I was like, ooh, wait a minute, this is too bad. But the next day when they came into practice and they were still sore, my narrow focused mentality was, well, welcome to gymnastics. This is challenging. We have some stuff to do. And I changed the assignment for some of the harder tumbling, but it was still the dosage to begin with was terrible. And my reaction to their response from the dosage was terrible. Right. And unfortunately, it just led to a really terrible 2 weeks of practice because they were sore for a week. No one could train. And then the next week, nobody wanted to do conditioning because they were worried about what would happen the next day to them. And, it was tough for me to swallow that because I have an exercise science background and I thought I was just like the man with conditioning and I knew how to do it. But I really didn't. I really didn't at all. So hopefully that summarizes the a bigger picture, broad view of what I was doing and then a very narrow example of what I was doing. But that has also happened in some other situations with the amount of routines I give someone, like I talked about in the first examples, or the assignments that I give someone, 10 routines here on beam and just do it until you get it right. If you're not doing your series, let's just do it until we get it right, So on the contrary, let's talk about an example of now how I approach things. I think there were a few really important things that I learned in the scientific literature as I got more into the workload science, some projects that I'm working on now in gymnastics. And I want to highlight that smart training is challenging. And I think it's really important to say that. It's challenging, but it's within what we call the athlete's envelope of function in the medical world. So it's just outside of their ability, right? And that's really important to know what athletes can take based on past practices and based on individual abilities. But it was just outside of their reach, which was not going to be something that was dangerous. And the way I know that is because of the second thing, which is that I now track specifically workloads and I track how many routines we do. I track how many turns I ask them to do. I track their strength and conditioning in a binder. We track wellness scores, which I'm happy to share about down the road. Just basic things that let us know where the response to training is. And so that helps us know a plan over the course of 6 to 12 weeks, which is periodization science, which is another thing I learned quite a bit about. But it helped me to have a solid science base behind the decisions that I was making. And also it helped me with having some expert coaching opinion behind what I was doing. And so the biggest thing that I think I did was I tried to establish a theory of why I was doing things, work with other coaches and work with outside experts who were better than me, like strength coaches or more experienced coaches, to try to get some sort of a baseline for measurements. And then we put in objective feedback loops along with communication feedback loops. And we would change the training more or less based on what they need. And the geeky term for that is called auto-regulation. And the science of that is very, very important for coaches to know about how to change those things based on how someone responds. So I think strategies that I really implemented were trying to be communicative about what I was doing. I spent 30 to 60 minutes per day reading new science or new ideas, and I asked for help. I think that was really the biggest thing. I realized that from a technical, from a cultural, motivational, and strength point of view, I didn't really know. So Nick Ruddick, people may be familiar with, is a very high-level coach from the UK. I started talking with him and asking him for help. I alluded to Eva. I asked a lot of help for her. And also I just studied a crazy amount of scientific literature and strength conditioning textbooks and worked with the strength and conditioning coaches to learn this. And so started planning my lessons and drills before practice and putting in binders that had 6-week cycles and really just tracking things a little bit more. But I think the biggest thing that was really hard for me to swallow because I was a physical therapist is I started to take accountability for injury patterns in the gym or poor performance patterns. So 6 of our girls having back pain is a problem with me, right? Like everybody complaining their legs are really, really sore when I didn't plan the workout to be that bad is a me problem, right? And I think there's also times when it was maybe a dual problem, is that they weren't sleeping enough or they were maybe not following the best strategies we gave them to stay healthy and stay safe. But I think I always started to scratch my head more when a lot of people complained of the same thing. And I think the worst thing I did was that when it was going good, I took all the credit. When it was going bad, I blamed the gymnast. That was like a very unfortunate thing I realize now. So concrete example of something that just happened a few weeks ago. We do very challenging called anaerobic intervals, which are like 90 seconds of work followed by some other stuff. And they're super hard, don't get me wrong, but they mimic floor energy systems training. So the first thing I did is I tested the workout before I gave it to the athletes. I did the exact workout that they were going to do proportional to my ability. And I realized it was way too hard. Like I was dying. So I toned it back a little bit. And then I actually did the workout again with the athletes while they were doing it. And I, on the fly, noticed that, this is going to go too long. This is going to be too hard. And I was watching the athletes very carefully, and I know what stressed state looks like. I know what panic looks like. So one of our athletes actually started hyperventilating. And I was like, "Are you okay?" She was like, "No, this is just really hard." I was like, "Okay, let's take a moment. We'll calm down." And I sat with her, but I took off 2 rounds of the 5-round workout. So it was 5 rounds, and I put it down to 3 because I just looked down the line of athletes, and I'm sweating, I'm dying in there, right? And I'm like, if I'm having a hard time still, this is really challenging for them. So I cut it down to 3. I helped the athlete I was stayed with, who was having a tough time. And everybody was like, okay, 3 rounds was perfect. Like I was having a hard time at 2. I could get through 3, but if we had done 5, I would have been completely crushed. And we all agreed that like, okay, my fault. We need to make that a little bit easier. And so the next time we did that same workout, we go in 6-week cycles. Like I said, we did the 3-round workout, just slightly more tweaks to it. Everybody got through it, said that was very challenging, but we were okay. And the girl who previously was almost having a panic attack actually finished well ahead of most of the athletes because she wasn't so scared of the workout. And the next day, tired, sore, but not like the example I said before, which was like, I can't touch my legs, I can't go down the stairs, and we lose a week of training. So hopefully that kind of summarizes a lot of the studies that I did, but also just a very tough pill I had to swallow about, hey, I actually don't know the science of strength conditioning, and I have to take accountability and apologize for the fact that I overdosed a little bit. Yep. And then here we can kind of go through these a little bit as well, but just summarizing the points about what I think Gretchen illustrated so well. And kind of in my examples is on the then side, there wasn't a scientific rationale. I was doing limited continuing education. I was blanket programming for all the athletes, and I was doing unilateral decision making, which is like, this is what I think is right here. You go do this, right? It was very quantity driven first and then quality second. Do it until you get it right. Do 10. That's the number. And I had outliers in our program as rationales. And I think this is something we see very commonly on the larger stage of high-level competitive gymnastics sometimes, is we take the one extreme end of the bell curve of the athlete who can tolerate the training load or can do the work or is more durable. And we say, well, everybody should be able to take that, right? And so we throw that program on all the athletes, and the bell curve shakes out where for 60% of the athletes, it's maybe not terrible, but for 20% of the athletes, it's not enough training load. And for 20% of the athletes, we really hurt or put people in a lot of danger. So I think that was a really dangerous thing that I was doing. Okay. And then the other things I was talking about, doing it until you get it right. This is what it takes, right? Very cliche, scapegoating myself, right? To get away from the fact that I had more to learn. I was hiding behind my insecurities and my lack of knowledge and using these buzzword catchphrases that I heard other coaches use to try to get away from my own problems, right? And a lot of this comes down to me being insecure as a coach, that I didn't know the answers. And so I would literally just make stuff up as I went along. But also when someone asked me a question I didn't know, I would make up an answer that sounded kind of close to correct and throw a bunch of buzzwords at them, right? And I realize now how terrible that was. But the biggest thing for me personally as a coach, and we talked about this in the first, it was very much an extrinsic driver, right? I had this us versus them mentality, or you versus you for competing, right? And I was very much hyper-focused on what are the scores, who got medals, and for me personally, how many things can I put up on Instagram to get attention? What does my Facebook profile look like? Projecting this facade that I was someone that I was not. And so on the now example, I am happily a massive geek, and I used a lot of scientific rationale in my training. I try to do daily continuing education for an hour every day. I treat and I program based on global principles, and I tweak based on the athletes who need it. There's bilateral decision making, as we talked about in the last example, with kind of common ground between, hey, is this too hard? Is this not enough? What do we think? Very much quality driven now, and quantity as a secondary thing. It's important to do numbers, but not if the quality erodes in the process. And I've learned from Nick and from many other high-level coaches who have had very good, successful athletes at the elite national stage, that they also too follow this quality over quantity. And I think the best thing is that I try to think about groups and patterns as a rationale instead of those outliers. But now my response when someone isn't having a tough time is like, let's take a step back, like actively saying to the athlete, like, what are tools in our toolbox that we can fix this? Why aren't you hitting this angle? Like, what do you think's causing that? And this athlete last night said, my shoulders aren't open, right? And I said, okay, what else? And like, I'm not tapping at the right time. So it's great. What can we do as a drill to work on that? Well, I can do this shape changing drill. Like, fantastic. Let's go do 5 of those. Come on back and I'll get you on the next one, right? The other thing I start saying a lot now is we have great days and tough days, right? Neither of those things are reasons to just go bullheaded straight ahead, but they're just things like, hey, some days you're going to feel great and you're going to have a lot of capacity. Some days you're going to feel like this is the last thing you want to do, but we can still squeeze a little bit of orange out of this, orange juice out of this orange and get something productive, even if it's not a huge deal. And I always tell the athletes, along with accountability for myself, is we can't control everything. We can control our effort and our attitude, right? Which is part of that intrinsic driver piece at the bottom. We took a me versus me mentality, which is like, I'm just trying to be the best version of myself, and the athletes to try to improve versus themselves. And we all collectively take pride in progressing and not having perfection, but also facing fears, trying to be courageous, trying to be a better version of ourselves, and just trying to get what we want for our goals. From a coaching point of view, I spend a lot of time now planning my training, 6-week binders, teaching the coaches about periodization, learning more myself, skill breakdowns, talking with Nick on a bi-weekly basis for athletes who need help, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that is again, I'm sorry for a long-winded example there, but I hope that helps illustrate some very real things that happened like this week in the gym that hopefully people can take home with them.
Well, that's great, Dave. And thank you so much for your honesty. Okay. So just very quickly, we've chosen two topics for tonight, and I would just like to take a step back and talk about the theory that explains why discipline and smart training strategies work. And Dave referred to this a little bit earlier. Here's what we know about what keeps people motivated and enjoying what they're doing. And when you have those two things happening, you're going to have increased performance. People need to feel that they have a choice and some say over what's happening to them and their experiences. They need to feel competent or a sense of mastery, that they're good at something in order to continue doing it. And because we're social beings, we need to feel like we belong. We need to feel connected to others. And so in relation to training, we need to have good relationships with our athletes and coaches and teammates in order to be motivated and enjoy and perform well. We need to feel like we're accomplishing something and achieving our goals. And we need to feel like we have some control over our experiences. Another way to look at it, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, is a hierarchy of motivational needs. And starting at the bottom, of course, we need our basic needs met. And we can all relate to being exhausted or being very hungry and not being able to be very effective at our jobs because we're tired and hungry. We also need to feel safe, and that means both physical safety and psychological safety. So really hard to achieve when you're experiencing fear, for example. We need to feel included and feel that sense of belonging. And only when we have those needs met can we really strive to achieve performance-related goals. So by working with the lower levels and ensuring they're in place, we set the foundation for athletes and coaches to perform really, really well.
And I can just share a few, I guess, parting words and summary, of kind of the way I think what we should take away from this is I really think that people should think that the movement towards safe sport is absolutely 100% for athletes and coaches and parents and medical providers and support staff to enjoy this amazing sport that we take part in. And I didn't say it earlier in the presentation because Gretchen was going so well, I didn't want to interrupt. But the reason that I have changed and the reason that I have realized that I need to be different in the last 5 years is largely not in a selfish way, but because I felt terrible coaching. I felt burnt out and stressed that I didn't know how to help kids. And I felt that I was just kind of burning my candle on three sides. And so there are only so many days that I could take in the gym where more athletes were getting hurt and more performances weren't going great and more kids were quitting our sport because they weren't happy making progress, or I was staying up so late trying to make up lost time for things that I didn't plan for or stuff like that. So selfishly, it started with me having some honestly some depression and major anxiety at meets because I didn't know how to help and what to do, and that motivated me to seek help and get more ideas to help out. So my personal life was bleeding into it, but then it became a situation of I have a very rare opportunity to help these athletes and help these kids be great people. And I want to not only help them with their journey, but I want to be a positive example for them to follow. And if that is what comes out of me tackling some of my own demons, as I've talked about on my podcast, and being willing to take accountability and responsibility and be humble about these things, if it then secondarily helps the athletes do that, then I really think that's what we're all doing here. So it's a shout out to my friends who also were willing to change in our coaching staff. They all took the journey with us, and our amazing program director who also made some hard decisions and let go of some people who refused to change after they had some significant flaws in the way they were approaching the ways they treat the kids. And so it took us as a group deciding we're going to put our foot down and not tolerate negative coaching. And it also took our director staff being willing to let some people move on. So I hope that just really summarizes here what you say is that you can get more enjoyment, you can have better finances, you can have better retention, you can be happier at work, you can be excited to work with the kids. You will feel as though your performance objectively increases, but you're ready and excited to go to work. And I think that's why I spend so many very late night work doing these things to hopefully help people move towards that direction.
Okay, thank you, Dave and Gretchen, for those wonderful presentations. We're now going to move into the Q&A, and Kim is going to host.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. That was amazing, Dave and Gretchen. Thank you so much. We've had a lot of positive feedback in the chat, and I've been receiving texts privately from people all over. So that was amazing, especially kudos to you, Dave, for your bravery. It takes a lot of courage to not only recognize where you might be misstepping, but then to tell the world about it and help us all learn to do better. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Happy to.
Okay, so I'm going to pretend like I'm not flipping back and forth between 3 screens when I ask these questions. But okay, one thing, Gretchen, right off the top, a few individuals asked for the reference for the research on the Olympic level athletes who were brought up in an athlete-centric coaching model. So if you could throw that up there at some point tonight, and then maybe you could elaborate on the sample. Was it a range of sports? Was it sports specific? And did the athletes speak to any of the specific life skills they achieved or their overall well-being after leaving the sport?
Sure. So these athletes were primarily Canadian. There were a couple of Americans in the sample, and they came from a range of sports. And because of that, they were a range of ages. So there were some former gymnasts, and so they were, early 20s. And then there were some much older athletes in the sample as well. And we were really interested in the characteristics of the coach-athlete relationship and what they learned from their sport experience. And so a lot of the findings did have to speak to life skills. And one of the big things that came out was that they still love the sport and maintained engagement in it. And so that's when you see things like putting their own kids into the sport. And very clear examples. It was interesting because they were able to articulate the life skills that they learned. And very often we go through experiences and we do learn these things, but we're not able to put them into words. But these athletes could, because through the interactions with their coach, they often talked about, this is this kind of nervousness you feel before a big competition is the same thing you're going to experience when you go for that job interview. Dealing with failures and frustration, how many times are we going to experience that later in life? The conversations that Dave had with his athletes, those are things you learn in relationships throughout your life. So these athletes were able to articulate those things. But I'd be happy to put the reference up.
Okay, super, great. Dave, how about a question for you?
Sure.
This is a really great question. Thank you for your honesty, Dave, in sharing how you've grown and changed as a coach. Do you, as a coach, ever feel like you have to know all the answers all the time? Or do you ever share uncertainty with your gymnasts? For example, you might say you don't know why it's not working. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm happy you asked that. Thank you. As I hope maybe I tried to share, I used to be that way, right? I used to literally make up fake half answers to how to do a Yurchenko or why we were doing 15 of these exercises versus 7. And when people asked me, why do you do that? I would really just kind of fudge my way through it, because in the moment I knew I didn't know and I was insecure about it and my ego was getting bruised. And so I would try to fumble my way out of it. So I had to reflect a little bit on my medical practice here, because that has also happened sometimes when I was a younger clinician and I would kind of not have that great idea. And I've realized in both cases that it's actually very dangerous to do that, because saying you don't know or putting someone through something that's not gone through the rigors of peer-reviewed literature is dangerous on the medical side for us to do. So that trickled into my coaching stuff. And it was a situation where now I used to fear that if I said I don't know or I need help, that people would look at me, my athletes and the other coaches would look at me, would look down on me. And I was worried that I would feel some social pressure or shame associated with that. And so, as there's many things that happens in life, the things in your head are much worse than what actually happens in real life. And so when I started saying, a perfect example is this athlete was learning a Yurchenko. She was twisting for the first time, and I didn't really know exactly the drills I needed. And I was like, I actually don't know how to help you here. Let's keep doing layouts. And I'm going to talk to Nick. And I took a video, and I just, after practice, reached out to Nick. I was like, hey, man, I actually don't think I'm the best here. Can you help me out? And in the moment, I was worried Nick was going to think I was a bad coach. But he instantly texted back and said, like, hey, no worries. Yep, like I think it's common. A lot of people have this problem. So like, try this, try this, try this. And the same thing started to happen with other areas too, with strength conditioning, with the communication, the empathy thing I was talking about. The more I told people I didn't know, the more they respected me. And the more they actually realized I cared about them, because I was willing to put my ego aside and say, I care more about you, your progress, your health, and your long-term development than my own self-inflation, so to speak. And so the biggest test that has actually happened is with the athletes now, is when things come up about not knowing skills or drills or technique or stuff like that, or answers to things, especially around areas I'm not an expert in, like nutrition or some other things. When I say I don't know, let me find someone to help you. It strengthens our relationship more than anything I've ever done in the past, along with, like I said, doing strength with the athletes. It strengthens the relationship more because they realize, like, wow, I think Dave really cares about me as a human, that he's willing to go out and seek outside resources. So when athletes see you studying and see you trying new things and learning from people, they really, I think, respect you more in the long term.
Absolutely. It might even be one of the best things to come out of this culture shift that we're all moving through, and that is alleviating some of the pressure on coaches to be the expert in every single aspect of a gymnast's life.
Yeah.
They're trying to be the physio, the nutritionist, the conditioning and strength coach, etc., along with everything that's encompassed by being a really good technical gymnastics coach. It's really too much for anyone.
Yeah, it's funny because Nick and I have these conversations, and Eva actually too, who's a mental health kind of thing, and then my friend Christina, who's a very high level nutritionist. We have these conversations sometimes that, like, how much time and effort you save by just asking and learning for help from an expert is crazy, right? Because Nick sometimes texts me too. He's like, hey, I'm working with these athletes and they have ankle problems. I have no idea how to fix them. I could look it up and try to go online, but what do you think? And I'm like, oh, for me, I've spent 10 years helping people with these problems. I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. Try these 3 things. And the same thing with him on the Yurchenko. He's like, oh yeah, no problem. Try these 4 drills. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I think it's a situation where if you can realize that you're going to learn more, you're going to help the athlete, and it's going to feel good to learn something and kind of have that tool in your pocket in the long run. It's uncomfortable in the short term to learn, admit that, but in the long term, it's great. And I think we talked about in our discussion about how that little bit of uncomfortable feeling is necessary for progress.
Absolutely. And I think the cost of not doing it is far too great, because it eats away at your own personal self-view and your esteem and so forth. So
yep, I agree.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
Happy.
Gretchen, I just have a couple of, it's a little off topic, but I think it's important maybe we discuss it in such a big forum. So we have a viewer who has obviously had a less than positive experience in submitting a complaint. It doesn't specify whether they are speaking about a provincial organization or GymCan or a club situation even. So I'm just going to kind of read it the way it is. They'd like to know that when they get a response from the organization who is responsible for their for enforcing ethics and rules, and that organization ignores a valid complaint, which by this account is supported by evidence, perhaps written proof or witness statements, and even responds with comments that are quite intimidating and silencing to the individual making the complaints. What should people do if they find themselves in that situation where the place they're trying to express concern is not feeling safe for them, and perhaps the response they're getting from their organization is feels silencing rather than encouraging?
There's lots to that question.
Yeah.
a couple of things come to mind, and I'm not sure whether the complainant in this case is an athlete or not. I think if they are an athlete, it would be important to remember that, in a study of 1,000 Canadian national team athletes, less than 15% ever reported their concern, their experience of abuse. And they were very clear about why they didn't do that there was no safe place to do it. They feared repercussions to their own careers and so on. If it's not an athlete, maybe another coach, administrator, someone who's observed, first of all, we all as adults in this country have a duty to report. And if the first avenue for reporting does not work, then it's about finding another one. And I think in terms of particularly athlete protection, there's no wrong door, and there can be several doors.
What do you mean by doors?
Well, so they may have gone to their own club or sport organization and didn't have any luck. So if that door is not open, then go up the chain. If it's up to the provincial level or to the national level, there have been many cases where something at the provincial level is not handled to the complainant's satisfaction. And in that case, they can go to the national level. So that's another door. But there are also, places outside of gymnastics. So the SDRCC is one, the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada receives independent complaints. That is an avenue, and pretty soon we will have our own independent body in this country for Canadian sport, all sports, that people can go to directly. It would be a little bit like going directly to Children's Aid Society, or it would be if you have a complaint about a teacher, you can go to the College of Teachers. If you have a complaint about a physician, you can go to the College of Physicians and Services. We are now going to have a similar model in sport. An announcement will be made in the coming weeks about this independent body. And that will mean that anyone who has a complaint can take it directly there. And that takes it out of the hands of sports, which is so long overdue, because sport organizations, first of all, do not have the capacity to deal with cases of athlete abuse. They don't have the time, the money, or the expertise. More importantly, they are always in a position of conflict of interest. You cannot be complaining about, a successful coach when that sport organization is in part invested in that sport. I mean, we have to remember that anybody who works for a sport organization, your very employment and job security depends upon the performance of that athlete and that coach. So it's riddled with conflicts of interest. And sport has been in this very insular world forever, where they could establish their own rules and manage their own complaints. And look at the problems this has led to. This has led to the normalization of psychological abuse, the normalization of body shaming. Look what's happening in Canadian artistic swimming right now. And that's because it's been insular. We're being, really pushed in sport to bring our practices in line with how young people are treated in other sectors. You can imagine what would happen to a teacher if they said some of the things that coaches say to athletes. This is part of the culture change. we have to align our norms and our standards to the expectations of the broader Canadian society. And that means taking the complaint process out of sport organizations. And sport organizations have called for this. We've called on the Canadian government to establish an independent body, and finally we have it coming. So it's a very long-winded answer, but pretty soon that door will be open and you no longer need to go through your club or your sport organization. You can go to independent people.
Right. Thanks for that information, Gretchen. And a sub-question related was around multi-jurisdictional structures. And I'll just make a general comment that is the structure that we operate within for sport across Canada, and particularly gymnastics. We're multi-jurisdictional, and you answered that question when you said that there are multiple venues for people, or doors to go through, for individuals who have a concern, and to a large extent, safety, their feeling of safety and being heard is paramount in these situations. And because we are a youth serving organization primarily, that the protection and safety of children is of really paramount concern.
And part of the culture shift is this collective responsibility.
Yes.
So you're quite right that voices need to be heard, and it's about finding that open door, and if one is closed, you just keep looking.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's move to a coaching question. So maybe Dave, at what age should I or shouldn't I involve athletes in goal setting or individual programming? And is readjusting goals due to lack of commitment or following previous plans, would that be considered punishment? Readjusting goals due to lack of commitment.
Yeah, so I'll kind of attack the two pieces. The first being the aspect of, sorry, what was it again? I got confused by the second one coming.
Should I?
Oh, what age?
At what age should I or shouldn't I involve athletes in goal setting?
So I think honestly, there is always an element of goal setting collectively that has to be present. I think that what happens is the younger they are, the more it is coach led, maybe group oriented. It's much more like fill in the blanks and help me make this best make sense for you. Like we actually just had one of our meets, and we had posters across the wall on the gym about what each level wanted to do with their meet. And the level 2s can barely form their own thoughts about this, but they still met and talked about the meet and what they wanted to accomplish. And the coach would write those things down for them, and they would put them up on their Post-it note. Some of the goals were adorable. They were really adorable. Like, I want my ponytail to look amazing, right? And then other people had more concrete goals, but they were very young. Those athletes are 5-6 years old. I think as the athletes grow older, and I would love Gretchen's thoughts on this, but I always view it as the relationship shifts as more of a mentorship and teaching them how to create those goals and kind of putting bumpers on, like, okay, have you thought about this? This might not be realistic, or like, I think this is a different way to approach this. And in that middle age of like 7 to 12, we're kind of trying to teach them. And the athletes that I work with that are 13, 12 and up, it's very much here's some prompts to think about. Let's take 10 minutes of the night, tomorrow night to brew on these. And then either collectively as a group we can share, or we can meet one-on-one and have a fluid discussion about it. And then ultimately, when the athletes leave our program and they go to college, if they're competing in college or if not, it's obviously they're pretty much on their own. So I think it's always present. It's just the filter of how much goes in the role modeling piece of it and the mentorship piece of it versus the actual athlete is the one driving the dictation of it. So I think hopefully that makes sense and answers the question. The second piece was, again, remind me, because I'm trying to think on dual lanes right now. What was the second piece of the question, Kim?
It was...
Not to put you on the hot spot.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so is readjusting goals due to lack of commitment considered punishment?
Yeah, another great question, and I think this is all about the context in which you deliver the message of needing to think about goal changing. And so we very frequently, and I think I said this in the first meeting, is we intentionally schedule 2 times a year where we try to meet with the athletes for 15 minutes one-on-one and talk about these things. One, like, how's your life going? How's school? How's your family? What's going on? But the conversation morphs into like just checking in. Do we still want these big term goals? Do you still want to make this level? Do you want to go to college? Have you changed your mind about anything like that? Because sometimes the malalignment of goals between parents, coaches, and medical providers and or the athletes themselves is sometimes a huge sticking point of friction, and surface level problems are really about these goals that have changed, and they feel nervous about telling coaches that these things have changed out of fear of social judgment from the coach or parents or their teammates, which in most cases is obviously not the case that's going to happen. But a teenager feels that way. They really want to not rock the boat socially like that. So we do frequently have that. We do not consider changing of goals a punishment, because we always frame this about like, what do you want out of this? What is your ideal outcome? What is your ideal version of yourself? And what is the ideal version of your future that you would like to see from gymnastics? And I learned this from studying some of these research studies about what really makes a positive change with people. And it's framing those questions that puts them in more of a relaxed kind of thought process, analytical point of view, and not a hot, emotional, reflexive, like someone's attacking me. So if I tell someone like, clearly we need to change your goals if this is what you're going to act like, right? Like that's going to put someone on their hind foot, versus if you say like, all right, let's pause here and think about like, hey, is everything okay? Like in a conversation away from the moment, but like, what do we want here? Like what's going on? What's in your head? Have things changed at all? And I'll just share an example. This literally happened the last month. Was an athlete who was very high level, who just after the COVID comeback, just never really kind of got her mojo back. She was kind of having a tough time with motivation and adherence to practice. And there was always a reason to maybe not do some stuff. And, I asked her in practice, I was like, just making sure everything's okay. Has anything on your mind? Has things changed? Do you want to talk about anything? In the moment, no, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. Right. And then on our WhatsApp mats, I get a small chapter dissertation on everything that's really going on. It was about, I don't want to compete. I don't feel ready. I'm nervous. I'm scared. I don't want my skills back, but my parents aren't giving me that option because they want to see me compete. And I was like, oh, I get it. What looked like a motivational issue and maybe some attitude at practice was really, I don't want to compete. I don't feel ready. I'm scared to tell my parents. And I had to foster and teach her. I didn't want to step in there, but I had to mentor her and teach her about like, well, this is an important skill to learn how to have uncomfortable conversations and think about how you can maybe present to your parents, like really look your mom in the eyes and your dad in the eyes. Like, listen, I really need to talk to you about this. This is on my mind. It's really stressing me out. Do you mind if we talk about it? And 2 days go by. I ask her at practice, like, the meet's tomorrow. Well, what are we doing? She's like, oh, I'm not competing. My mom's totally fine with it. I had a good conversation with her. And I was like, oh, good. Thanks for letting me know. I was literally setting your vault up as we spoke. So thanks for letting me know. But it's just an example of, in the moment,
Right.
old me would have been like, there goes her again. She's just having a toot, But in this moment, I was like, something's going on here. This is not right. And it was really a deeper level. So, but her goals have changed this year because of coronavirus and because of many other factors that I'm not going to discuss. But yeah, they've changed, and I don't think that's punishment. I think it was an open, honest conversation. So Gretchen, I don't know, did I say anything in there that doesn't align with what you think, or? Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the natural consequences thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You establish a plan, you establish goals, and if they change, you're not applying a punishment. It's a natural consequence.
Yeah.
If you make an agreement, if you get these skills, you can compete in this meet or at this level. And if the athlete decides that that's not in the cards, then the natural consequence is not to compete in that meet or compete at a different level.
Yep.
And then the coach isn't using a position of power to apply a negative decision.
Yeah.
In a sense, the athlete is making that.
Yep. And Kim, I do want to add one more thing, is that I know the emails are already typing now, like, well, when's the parent who's not really in line? I think I get this on the medical side, a lot of athletes who have injuries or unfortunately surgeries, and the timeline seems to shrink faster and faster every week of when the parent wants the meet to be able to go or stuff like that. And I think having the same exact fluid conversation, in this case, obviously there was some parent, friction there as well. But I think, again, mentoring the athletes about why we need to have an open, honest conversation. And I've had other times where it's like, okay, let's bring your mom and dad in. Let's bring, the coaches in who are, I'm the medical side, right? I'm saying, let's bring your coaches in. Let's jump on a group chat. Let's figure this out, because what I'm thinking is realistic and what the parent is pushing you towards is making the athlete feel uncomfortable, and the coach is maybe not even pushing. They're just like trying to get answers. And so you have to have that number one, athlete, what do you want? What's important to you? And everybody else, are you hearing this? We're all in the same goal, and there's some tough ones that are really, really hard. That's like, she doesn't want to do college gymnastics anymore. She doesn't want to do gymnastics anymore. And there's some other ones that are really, really small, which is just like, this one skill is really just making my life a nightmare, and I need to find something else to do. It was like a release move with an athlete. They're like, I just cannot do a pack anymore because that's how I got hurt, and it hurts my back. And so I don't want to do a pack anymore. But some bigger ones about like, oh, I get what's going on. This is deeper seated, and I'm just going to let you guys take this conversation for a couple weeks, and let's circle back down the road.
Okay, great. Gretchen, any advice for a coach who would like to enter into a conversation with a fellow coach around, in this case, described as old school in their behaviors? So maybe some advice for coaches who want to support their colleagues in maybe shifting their coaching style to something that's, I don't know, more current or.
I'm thinking that Dave probably has the better answer.
I'll share after you,
because he's sort of lived it. I think what I've heard from his story is helping people to reflect upon their practices and the effects their practices have had on others. It's about reaching out with an openness to learn, and also reaching out with an openness to learn from people who are not in sport. Dave has said that he learned a tremendous amount from a mental health psychology expert around discipline, around behavior change, and how to work with young people. And developing, we also heard from Dave, developing a bit of a community of practice, that you have other people you can reach out to and say, I'm having trouble with this. What's been your experience? So I think and having, discussions like this is very helpful to shed light on those who prefer older ways because traditionally they've worked, to shed light on, first of all, there is a need to adapt. And right now there are some external pressures on sport to adapt to more progressive ways of interacting. And then to provide the tools, to provide the education, to provide the support through other coaches who can assist with this shift, resources. It's all part of the picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely share a few things practically from my example, but it's a great time to highlight. I'm currently reading, I think, one of the best books on this topic I've ever read, which is Rethink by Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist here in the States. It's something that hit me harder than I ever have in a book, is he talks about how when you question someone's abilities and their way of thinking, many times their self-identity is attached to those methods and those beliefs. And so when you say someone has to change, you're actually threatening their identity as a coach. And I think a lot of times that's what's going on. And I've thought a lot about this now in my own life is, my sense of self-worth and my self-esteem was tied to my knowledge level as a technical gymnastics coach. So when someone tells me like, that Yurchenko looks terrible, I'm really hurt by that, because I'm like, I think I'm doing a good job. So I think you have to, which leads into my approach is, I really believe that the cornerstone of approaching these things is empathy. I really do. I think you have to take the time to really stop and think about like, well, what's going through this person's mind that they're still using these methods that maybe science has moved away from or are concerning. And so I get a lot of DMs about this, about people who are trying to ask for help. And I say, hey, you have to start with empathy. You have to start with accountability and say, what's my role to play here? Is there something that I'm contributing to it? Because you take that to the conversation, but also you should research beforehand and say, what are 3 solutions that could happen here as an alternative? And that's how you approach the conversation. You say, hey, I understand maybe you feel this way about this certain technique or the way you do stuff, and I realize that maybe I haven't really been great. I got to fix these 2 or 3 things, but here's a problem that I'm noticing. A lot of other coaches notice it. And I'm trying to find a constructive solution because I think everybody will be happier, you included, if we can change this. So here are 3 things I've thought about. But in your mind, back to this question that I use a lot now is like, well, what is your ideal future that you would like to see come out of this? And that, coaches often say, well, like these athletes need to get these skills and they need to move up in levels. They need to perform better at meets. I need them to be stronger and faster. And then you pause and you go, okay, well, if what we were doing was working, we wouldn't be having a conversation and we wouldn't have a problem. They'd be fast enough. They'd be strong enough. They'd all be level 10s. They'd get their goals. No one would be hurt. But clearly it's not working because these girls say their back hurts and these girls haven't done well. And these guys over here are really complaining about burnout. So something is wrong. And I'm trying to find an alternative solution to work together here and figure it out. What do you think is the best way to do that? And then you have a fluid conversation about, okay, I hear that. And you outline how the small goals of things you might want to change that you've researched are eventually going to lead to that bigger goal they want. And here's a really practical example that I always have dealt with, especially as I work on the elite level sometimes, is why are you doing these flexibility drills? I don't think they're going to be, like, in my mind, I'm like, those are dangerous, right? And in their mind, like, well, we need bigger leap angles. And I'm like, okay, is it working? Are you getting leap angles when we stretch like this every single day? So long? Like, well, no. And it's like, okay, well, here's what some things I've researched and said. Here's some new drills we can try. Here's some things we can take away. Here are some ways we can measure this progress. Let's try it for 2 weeks. If it doesn't work, we'll find something else. But right now, we're just spinning our wheels in the mud. And so you give them tools to be successful. They feel in control. They offer some drills as well. You make a new circuit. You say, okay, you go try this. They have new information. They feel great about the situation. They see objective progress and their goals maybe in 2 to 4 weeks. And they go, wow, it's getting better. The leaps are bigger. Okay, maybe we won't do these over splits that are super aggressive, right, all the time. Maybe we'll do some more active flex and we'll do some of the research supported stuff. So, and in terms of that doesn't always get received well. And I'm sorry, I'm long-winded here, but it's important. If it doesn't go well and isn't received, you move up, like Gretchen said, to the next level. You talk to a head coach and say, hey, this isn't going well. I don't know if this is great. If that doesn't go well, or if that person is the head coach, you move up to the gym owner level and you say, hey, this is not going well. If that doesn't go well, if the person is the gym owner, you get your coaches around you and have some strength in numbers and say, hey, the 10 of us think we need to change this. And if that doesn't go well, then it's the state level, it's the regional level. And you get up, maybe you file a complaint if it's that bad. Like you said, you go about filing a complaint. If you get all the way to the end of that, you ask yourself, is this a good fit? It's time, and maybe it's time to move on here. I've left 2 gyms that I was like, morally, I can't stomach this anymore. Not because like I think people are abusive, but just like the fact that you can't even have a conversation about drill circuits and flexibility methods means that sometime down the road, it's going to explode about something that you don't agree with, that I don't agree with. So it's just a time to move on. And now, I used to drive 45 minutes to the gym because I wanted a better environment. I drive 45 minutes to my clinic because I want a better environment. It's worth it for me for mental health.
I really liked where you started there, Dave, around asking people, where do you want this to go? Where do you want to see yourself? What's the kind of future vision here? And in psychology, that's called solution-focused discussions. And it's a wonderful way to not only talk with athletes, but problem solve with colleagues if there's a coach who doesn't want to change practice. Because as you say, it's not threatening to their self-worth.
Yep.
And it doesn't get into that trap of, this is a problem, why is it a problem? And that whole cycle of identifying the causes of problems. Instead, it's future focused and it's solution focused. And it's like, where do we want to go and how can we best get there? And it adds a really, it's constructive and keeps the relationship very positive and non-threatening.
Yeah. One of the best quotes I shared from Adam Grant's book was, tie your self-worth and your ideas to your strategies and your goals, not your beliefs, because you can get to the same end goal without needing to. You can constantly rethink your ideas and get new ideas because you're moving towards a strategy of a goal and not your own. Like you identify with like, I'm this, I'm a coach, I'm a this type of worker, and it's hard to shed that armor when people start poking holes in it.
Okay, well, I want to be respectful of both of your times as well as our audience's time. So rapid fire. I only have like 18 more questions to ask you. So first one, Gretchen, what role could the NCCP and GymCan play in helping coaches learn about or generate ideas for how we can change, reimagine what we can do as coaches?
I think it's happening. I think this process has started. It began, of course, with the NCCP Safe Sport Training, which was originally designed to educate people about the Universal Code. And that was sort of a necessary step. What are the prohibited behaviors? What needs to change? But now we need the other piece of the equation, which is, what do we replace those behaviors with? If we're not supposed to do X anymore, what is the Y? And that's what we tried to do tonight. Let's replace punishment with discipline, hard training with smart training. And I think this is where our education needs to go. What are the expected standards today? And what do they look like? And how do we get there? And have a very positive, as I say, solution-focused discussion.
Okay, excellent. Dave, one of our viewers was asking if you could share, please, how you chart athlete wellness and how you get feedback. So conversations that you've had, apps that you use.
Yeah, there's a question about books, and that's why I keep looking to my left, because I'm looking at what book I'm going to grab. So sorry if I keep getting distracted. But so I put a couple blogs up on this, so it's available to download for free. The most basic version, and this has been validated through many other studies. Tim Gabbett is the best researcher here, and I've become friends with him. He's helping me design a custom gymnastics workload study. But you ask every day, start of practice, on a 0 to 10 scale, 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, how well did you sleep last night? So that encompasses quality and quantity of sleep. You ask from a 0 to 10 scale, how ready do you feel from a muscular point of view? So that kind of encompasses soreness levels, but it's a linear, direct upwards, so it can get to a wellness score. So 0 is no soreness. 0 is I feel terrible. My muscles are super sore. I have nothing ready. 10 is I feel amazing muscularly. You do the same thing with fatigue levels. 0 is 0 in the gas tank. 10 is 100% in the gas tank. I'm ready to go. And then mood overall. So mood 0 being I feel very crummy. I'm very in a grumpy mood. 10 is like I'm bouncing off the walls. So that gives you numbers to track very easily. We do that with athletes as young as 10. It's sometimes smiley face, sad face, but it still works. And then you can add those numbers up at a 40 for a wellness score. So at a 40, that gives you a line to track. And we're doing pretty high level data with the NCAA here and some elite teams for comparing that to workloads. And it's pretty easy. It's pretty good to do. And then like I alluded to, we track strength conditioning, weight lifted, reps, sets, all that kind of stuff. So there's a very long geeky discussion, but there's multiple long lectures for free on Shift's YouTube channel if you want to watch that.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned your podcast, because there have been a few questions about some of your, I think it was most favorite research. What was it?
Books, maybe textbooks.
Yeah, research textbooks, and also strength and conditioning. Yeah. Tips. So maybe you could just, while I ask Gretchen a question, maybe you could put a few things in the Q&A.
I'll just do that because I have them, but I'll put them in the text.
Okay, awesome. Back to my other sheet. Hold on. Gretchen, I would like to ask this last question that just came in. As a coach / manager, what can I do about the gyms that are a negative environment? I've left it, but I'm upset for the kids in that community because they are in a toxic environment and they deserve better. Any advice there?
Well, that's a tough one because there's only so much a person has control over, particularly if left the club. There are some sort of best practices that should be incorporated by clubs to kind of do these climate surveys to keep a handle on their environments. And one of those is establishing mechanisms to deliberately look for and listen to athletes' voices. That should be part of club structures, both while the athletes are in the gym and as an exit interview once they leave. Of course, this has to be done carefully by neutral people, but that is a best practice in terms of assessing environments within clubs. And only when you have those kinds of assessments can you do anything about it. Otherwise, there's this gradual trickle of people leaving the club, as this person has experienced themselves. And unless somebody is carrying out some metrics around, what's the dropout rate, how many people are leaving versus staying, then you don't have any other kind of indicators. But athletes' voices have got to become, this is more of an athletes' rights perspective, that they have a voice at the table.
Absolutely.
Kim, I just want to say these book titles because the chat is not going to be available on the replay, I think. So just quickly, The Science of Gymnastics by Montme Gemini is the most recent one specific. Strength Conditioning, A Science Perspective by Cardinale, and then Strength Conditioning for Sports Performance by Moody and Jeffries, and then The Science and Application of High Intensity Interval Training by Lawrence. And those are like my first notch ones.
Okay. And for those of you that barely understood what he said because he talked so fast,
Sorry.
It will be on the replay.
Sorry.
Or you can email me and I'll get it to you.
I like ramp up as the webinar goes on. I get more excited. Sorry, Philippi.
That's right. Awesome. Thank you for those. Okay, a quick question for either of you. How can we eliminate the perception associated with lining up our athletes tallest to shortest? It sort of mimics, the military dominance style rather than democratic leading or leadership, from this person's perspective. How can we do better is the question.
I defer to Gretchen. I would love to hear her thoughts on this.
Well, I guess my first thoughts are, sport has very strong military roots.
It does.
It was established.
Touche.
And we have lots of leftovers from that, lining kids up, even our language, offense, defense, for team sports. There are lots of remnants of military practices in sport. Drills is another example. So, I guess just having that ability to reflect and say, every time there is that kind of military authoritarian reference, to a little light should go off and say, is there a better way? Is there a more democratic way to do this? And that would be my first thought about that.
Great. Any thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, there are times when we line up more out of necessity because we're worried about being in another group's like event rotation. But for the majority of times, we just have a group like casually get around us in a group, like literally a group. So we just chat that way. And as long as people are focusing and their eyes are kind of like, in my direction, I have their attention, then I'm okay with that. I don't think I need to put them in height order. Sometimes we line up and just find a spot in the line because of necessity, not because of order. But I've always been fine with group kind of surrounding.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much. We've gone way over time, and thank you to our participants. In fact, most people are still on the line, so they're interested in what you're saying. So thank you to everyone. And I'd like to pass it back over to Ellen, but with lots of gratitude to you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Gretchen. That's great.
Thank you, Kim. And thanks, Dave and Gretchen, for that really insightful Q&A session. So just once again, on behalf of GymCan, we thank all the attendees for joining us tonight. I want to give a huge shout out and thanks to Philippe, our interpreter. We had very minimal issues in terms of setting up the interpretation, so we're happy about that and hoping everybody was able to hear in their language of choice. Thank you as well to our fabulous and honest and insightful presenters tonight, Gretchen and Dave. Thank you for coming back to us and sharing your insight again. We really appreciate it. Just for the attendees, as a reminder, please fill out the survey to let us know your thoughts on tonight's webinar. It asks questions about topics of future interest and how we may improve our offerings for education. You will receive the pop-up when you close the webinar with the link to the survey. In the meantime, please visit our website to learn more about GymCan's Safe Sport program, to see our policies, and we also just recently updated all of our educational resources. So we hope that's helpful in advancing positive, healthy sport in your communities. On one final note, just an announcement, GymCan will be hosting a Gym for All webinar titled Introduction to the Gymnastics for All Event Handbook. And that will be held on Monday, April 12th from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. So please keep an eye out for the registration information in the coming days, and we hope you join us for that as well. Thank you and good night.